If you're doing something innovative, something which you have zero experience in, then you have to have that delusion, because it's not like you're drawing back on like, okay, I've been here before, I've been a founder for 10 years. You know, you are bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. You have to have that intoxicating self-belief.
Hello, I'm Dr. Becky Sage. I'm co-host of Founded and Grounded, and I'm here today with Ollie. Hi, Ollie. How's things going this week?
Very well, thank you. How's everything with yourself?
Yeah, good. I'm very much enjoying the fact that the sunshine has arrived here in the UK, which it's taken a very long time to do this year.
It's taken ages to come out, but it's definitely worth the wait. You can't beat the bit of sun on your skin, can you?
Absolutely. And I know we're being a cliche, being British people talking about the weather, but when you have a grey, long winter like we have, I think that we're allowed to talk about the sunshine.
Excellent.
Just a little bit.
And talking of sunshine, you're going to be heading off to Boston soon.
I am, yeah. I'm very excited. I've been selected to represent GB for an adult gymnastics competition. And so, yeah, the beginning of June, I will be out there in Boston and hopefully competing well. So, yeah, I'm working quite hard at the moment. I think it's taking a little bit of that extra headspace, just getting all the logistics sorted, extra training, that kind of thing. But it's all exciting stuff.
Well, we're definitely going to be cheering you on from the sidelines here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, talking of people doing exciting things, we've got a really fascinating founder this week. Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Can do indeed. We've got Roei Samuel, who is founder of a company called Connected. Essentially, it's a platform to connect founders, investors, advisors, and it brings together a whole community and the startup ecosystem in one place. And Roei is a very interesting character, definitely larger than life. And he's a serial entrepreneur as well, which we should say from the outset.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like several of our guests this season, actually, Roei's story has really been shaped by these multiple entrepreneurial journeys that he's been on. These stories are coming out more and more, and how actually that first time is really just your lesson learning. You're getting your feet wet, you're making all those mistakes, and then it really does help as people move forward into their next business. So shall we listen to hear how Roei's path unfolded?
Let's do it. Roei, good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm good, Ollie. Thanks so much for having me here today.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, Roei. And great to have a fellow podcaster on the show as well. I mean, you know all the hard yards that goes into producing great content. Yeah,
100%. And as I said, we actually just stopped ours. And I think the way that you do it and the fact that you've got an interesting format and taking breaks to reassess and reevaluate is the right way to do content at the moment.
Definitely. And I'm sure we could have an entire episode talking about podcasting. But today I want to get to know the real Roei and more about your various business interests. So first of all, can you take me back to your first business, Real Sport, which you got an exit from? I heard you say the business was built on delusion. So can you tell me more about what you mean by this, about the business and how it's influenced your journey?
Yeah, of course. So how I look at the business now is Real Sport was providing content creation tools to sports fans, gaming fans, esports fans, helping them create podcasts, videos, other types of content, helping them distribute that online, optimize that content for social in a way which is really, really standard now, but quite bleeding edge back in 13, 14 when we brought it to market. But why I say it was built on delusion is because when me and my co-founder at the time, who were 21 and 22 years old, were like, right, we're going into, sports content and this wasn't a time where like content creation platforms were left, right, and center. We're going into an environment where we have zero rights, where the demand for rights and the cost to get into, rights holding is hundreds of millions, if not billions. We have zero technical ability between us, and I dropped out of my master's to do it. So built on delusion in that sense, I was like, what, Sky Sports, BBC News, NBC Sports, of course, we'll take those guys on. I've got zero knowledge, That's the sort of delusion you need, I think, as a 21, 22-year-old to go in something like that.
But you probably wouldn't have done it if you didn't have that delusion, right?
This is it, exactly that. And I think if you're doing something innovative, something which you have zero experience in, which, if it's innovative, will be the case, then you have to have that delusion, because it's not like you're drawing back on like, okay, I've been here before, I've been a founder for 10 years. You are bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. You have to have that intoxicating self-belief in order to make that jump, for sure.
And entrepreneurship is often a journey, and most people, maybe their first business doesn't work out, they were learning the ropes. For you, obviously, you got an exit and sold it and now become an angel investor and started other businesses. So how did that first business influence everything that's happened since?
Yeah, it's a great question. And certainly there are things that I have done with Connected and advice I've been able to give to companies I've invested in, which is totally shaped by huge mistakes I made at Real Sport, right? And to be fair, Real Sport was my first proper business, but you know, I had run club nights at universities before. I had done various other things. I was running trips from Nottingham to Amsterdam for Chinese students. You know, I was doing all sorts of bits, right? Where you learn a lot. You know, you do learn a lot. But absolutely, I think a lot of the mistakes we made at Real Sport. One of the things we suffered with was around 2016. There was a big switch in the flavor and appetite for investors and acquirers, moving away from reach and how many numbers you had on Facebook and how many followers you had on Facebook to subscription models. It was a big switch. And a lot of companies got hit by that, like Lad, Bible, Social Chain. These companies were valued at insane numbers. And then overnight, it was like, wait, hold on. If you're not converting to subscription, what does it mean? And Real Sport was a company like that, you know, and we switched too late. So lots of things that you learn the hard way the first time, which go into shaping future endeavors for sure.
So, Roy, tell me more about Connected. What was your vision for starting the business in the first place, and has it changed at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I founded Real Sport, as I said, dropped out of my master's, I did not come from banking. I did not come from VC. My dad was a failed entrepreneur who did not raise investment. I did not know anything about the investment world. I got very, very fortunate and through hustle met a really great angel investor, a guy called Roei, who was a seed investor into Domino's Pizza, Simba Sleep, Nutmeg, the private bank, like awesome angel investor who, him and his team, educated me in a way on some fundamental startup behaviors that I had zero idea about. And had I not had that education, no chance am I taking to exit. And I realized very quickly that these behaviors, which are not actually that sexy, not that rocket sauce, fundamentally, the frequency and quality of your investor reporting and therefore your investor relations, and two, your ability to access expert networks at speed, those two things are basically the biggest determiners of success for startups. So we just became really, really passionate, and I could see this in the companies I'd invested in. The ones who were doing these two things were just flying, or at least, navigating the storm and really weathering the storm and everything, versus the ones who weren't. So we just became really passionate about building out technology that makes those behaviors as simple as possible for anyone to get access to, regardless of if you come from VC or you don't, making those behaviors, that best practice, just as readily available as possible. So our mission and our core stays the same, obviously as a product and everything else evolves over time. And we're about, 3.5 years old now, so we're getting on a little bit. But that ethos remains the same.
Tell me one unsurprising benefit from doing stand-up comedy that has helped you personally or your business.
That's a great question. I would say almost like a biological sense of when you're owning a room. It's like this thing inside, and it's funny. I didn't have this with Real Sport because I did stand up between Real Sport and Connected, and it's like when you're killing in a room and it's like you can feel the crowd is just like eating your energy. And then for some of my first sales pitches, investment pitches at Connected, and I was like, oh, I feel that same energy. And it was the weirdest thing. It was like I did not expect to ever have that feeling again, but it's that same thing. It's like when you're just when they're literally feeding off the energy. And I would say it's like one of the best feelings ever, and it's why I think everyone should do stand up if you're doing something which is customer facing, employee facing, something where you've ever got to try and like hype people up. Basically, do stand up.
So Connected aims to really democratize the investment process. How do you ensure that Connected remains accessible and fair for all founders, particularly outside of the kind of major tech hubs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you're totally right that it's got to be about democratization and accessibility. One of the things that I think often precludes startups from getting access to best practice is the often restrictive terms that comes with it. So sometimes you go through an incubator or an accelerator or work with some people where they're trying to take equity, or they're taking big commissions, they're taking big brokerage fees, and it's quite prohibitive, and investors don't like it. It's not really good for founders. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people are questioning the university spin-out model. So for us, we realized we just need to make this as easy as possible. So if you're a pre-seed startup, you can use Connected for £10 a month. We're not taking equity in startups. We're not doing anything restrictive. We're literally saying this is the best practice. And look, some people will appreciate that. Some people won't. As founders ourselves, we know that often no one can tell us our baby is ugly, and we know the best way to do it. But we're just saying, look, this is what we've seen is the best way to get to success, or at least the most strongly positively correlated behaviors with success have access. So that's the way that we want to keep it democratic.
And can you give me a quick pitch for both investors, startups and advisors that you're trying to connect?
Yeah, well, I guess the pitch is, we've done the analysis around these behaviors and the outcomes they have on raising that success rate. I think startup failure is so difficult for everyone involved in the ecosystem, right? If you've ever been involved with one as an investor, as an advisor, or especially as a founder, it's brutal. It's an identity death on the founder side, at least. And it's not something anyone wants to go through. And I think structure, transparency, data, keeping your key stakeholders, keeping those relationships as transparent, as strong, as filled with trust as possible, helps us all navigate these difficult times. Find me a single advisor or non-exec who's been in the game for a while, who wouldn't say, do you know what, a piece of software which helped me with transparency into what's really going on with my portfolio companies. Me personally, I was on a board of a company I invested in where I wish they'd been using pre-connected, and it cost me a lot in legal fees because actually there was all sorts going on. And, you would have been able to navigate those things with transparency at the core. So I think if you've been involved in the space, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're just saying best practice, transparency, structured data, the way you connect, that's what we want to do. So the pitch should sell itself.
How has your experience as a founder influenced your investment philosophy?
Great question. I think as a founder myself, you know what it takes. And you also know that you would back an A team with a B plan every single day before backing a B team with an A plan, because the plan will change, the people don't really, or the mentality of the people don't. So it's all just founder focused. One thing I will say that has changed is between Real Sport and Connected, I was investing a lot more into startups directly. And therefore I was able to take bigger bets or better assessed bets on people. But now that we've connected with 100 people, international expansion, the only investments I've done over the last year, bar one, have been through syndicates and SPVs. So I'm actually going probably quite against my thesis and being a bit less founder focused and actually just trusting investors around me and trusting syndicates around me. But certainly in that period of time between Real Sport and Connected, best case in point about that is one of the first big investments I made. I invested 50k into a mental health technology company called Tolero, very passionate about mental health, after having gone through the founder journey especially. And it was a cool business, helping employers improve the mental well-being of their employees. Loved it as a space. Founder was amazing. Business didn't quite work out for one reason or another, lost my 50k. But when she became available, put her in as COO of Connected. Right, and it's that, and with the best investors that I've met, they're investing in people and knowing that it might not work the first time, but actually you're investing in them for the option on the second time, the third time, or to bring them into other projects. That's really what it's about.
The security threat to UK tech startups is growing. Protecting your innovation is crucial to your business success. Secure Innovation is here to help, and it only takes a few simple steps to get started. Don't leave it too late. Visit npsa.gov.uk/innovation to find out more and download the Quick Start Guide for free today. Are you looking to access finance for your business, but unsure where to go and who to trust? Introducing Hexa Finance, providing growth funding to startups and scale-ups throughout the UK. Ben and Stu started Hexa Finance with a clear mission to make finance more accessible to business owners like you. Launched in 2020, they know firsthand the growing pains you're facing. Their fast growth business is the proud winner of the Startup of the Year award and has recently been recognized for its economic contribution. So, if you need funding now or it's on your horizon, the experienced team at Hexa Finance are here to help. To access your free consultation, simply go to hexafinance.co.uk/contact. We hear all the time that business is all about people, and Connected is also in the business of people, essentially. And so it's no surprise that the value of people comes out really loud and clear, and that's something that Roei understands incredibly well, is how important people are. And in particular, I was very interested in this idea of the A team with a B plan. And we've heard this before, this idea that really what investors are looking for, or what a successful business is built on, is these A people. And it's not necessarily the specific plan, but it's the ability to pivot, to listen to your audience, to be able to be responsive, to drive forward the business through various different challenges that they may face. But I thought it would be quite interesting to actually just think about, what does an A team even mean? So have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that the narrative of kind of A players versus B players is maybe a little oversimplified. And there is a lot of nuance in there and lots of areas of grey. So I would kind of start the conversation with that. But what I would say is, Roei is a serial entrepreneur. He's done lots of hiring, probably lots of firing. What Roei has probably built up is this sixth sense of making judgments on people. And he knows when he sees those qualities, right? And that's what essentially an A player is. So he knows that person is going to get the job done. He can implicitly trust them. He knows if they make a promise, they're going to deliver on it. Also that they're bloody good at what they do. That's what separates an A player from a B player, right? And they're probably a bit borderline obsessive about their job and their role, and they live and breathe it. And then what I'd also say about A players is that they help add to a team dynamic. So they build up other people around them. They don't tear people down. They're very effective communicators. So all of these qualities, Roei probably knows intrinsically what he's looking for. What would you add to that, Becky?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think that it's such a contextual thing, actually. It's about people being in the right place and having the right role for them. So I actually think that it's also, as you said, there's lots of nuance there. And it's not about like this person is an A person, this person is a B person. I think it's about like, is this somebody who's really found the alignment, the roles, that work for them, and are they able to deliver what it is that you need them to deliver? And I think what is also really important in what you've just said is this idea that it's not just about having incredible kind of technical skills or specific skills for your role. It's about those extra things as well. And I think that is the big thing that makes the difference actually in terms of A or B. It's, can you do those additional things? Because we hear this question all the time, like, should I hire somebody who's like really, really great, but they've got a terrible attitude, or they're not good with other people in the team, or they don't always show up, or perhaps they don't show respect, or they don't have the passion for what you're doing? And actually, I think that it's very possible to have people have both those things. And I mean, we've talked about this before. There's like hire for attitude, and then you can develop skills. I think you want a certain level of skill, but also recognizing that an open mind, an ability to work with the team, and an ability to communicate well, and a good alignment with the goals of the business are all really important factors when you're thinking about that team.
Yeah, and also what I'd probably add to that is the responsibility of the founder is to motivate and show leadership. So if you can really get the best out of somebody, you're going to turn them into an A player if you know what drives them.
I absolutely agree with that so strongly. And I've seen it happen so many times. And I think it's exciting when that can happen. And honestly, I think that's one of the great jobs you get to do as a founder and as a leader in a business. I think that's a privilege to be in that position. So I think that very much is your job as the founder. I was also thinking about this in the context of what makes a great founder as well. What's an A team when it, if we're looking at it from an investor's perspective, or you and I, we work with many founders ourselves, and you were talking about that sixth sense, and it's always a question that I'm asking, I have to do in terms of some of the programs we're working on. We're constantly having to kind of assess, is this founder got potential? And with investors, they're asking the same question. So I've often had these conversations about, how do we know what that potential is? How do we know? And I think that there is still a part of it is objective. There's a bit of a checklist that we can say they've got these specific technical skills that are required in this role. They've got specific leadership skills. But also I still think there's that je ne sais quoi, that it factor or X factor that some people bring along, and perhaps you can't quite articulate that with a checkbox.
No, you're absolutely right. You can't do it with a checkbox. And I think the skills of a founder obviously developed and honed over time with running multiple businesses, like in Roy's case. I think what makes a good founder is somebody who's got a very high level of self-awareness. They know their strengths, know what their weaknesses, know where they need to bring people in to build that team, because you can't do it on your own. That's the fundamental. If you want to grow a business, you have to bring in the right people. So I think it's people who are very aware, have got incredible empathy. They understand the world, they understand what motivates people, what drives people. There can be lots of different leadership styles, different personality types. I don't think that matters. I think there's probably a misconception about these great leaders being extroverts, when in fact that's often not the case. So I think there are some misconceptions about what makes a great leader. In terms of what investors are really looking for, I think it's that resilience, that grit, that perseverance that is very well documented in the startup world. There's a great book by Angela Duckworth called Grit, which outlines exactly what that is. And I think a lot of it comes back to your personal life experiences. So if you look at founders, what have they had to overcome in their lives? What challenges have they had to endure? Like, how have they got through that? Because when the hard times come round, that is going to put them in a very good position to be able to deal with those challenges. So you often hear about these kind of rags to riches stories of, people maybe growing up on a council estate and having no money as a child and stuff like that. And, there's something inherent within them which has built up their character to actually now position them to grow a very successful business.
Yeah, I love the way you put that. And I think it's an ongoing conversation. One of the things with investors, or one of the ways in which I judge whether or not I think there's real potential, is how people are over time as well. And I think this is another kind of answer to this question. I don't think you can spot check, is this person a great leader? I think it actually is about kind of, is there a period of 3-6 months that you're able to see how that person deals with different things that come along, how they progress, how coachable they are. That's something that we look at. And can you see them evolving over time? And so it's actually, not an in the moment thing as well. I think that if you're trying to kind of assess that potential, then it's a dynamic thing that evolves.
It's a great point. And I think a lot of angel investors will put in that initial money, whether it's, something like a 10K, 25K, just to test them out. And then if they are successful and they've had that time to review an entrepreneur in terms of their progress and development of the business, then often they will go into follow-on rounds and support them throughout their journey. So I think that, having a track record of being an investor and seeing what people do with that over that time period is an incredibly important thing for investors to be able to take away.
So another thing, and it's actually related to the type of person that an entrepreneur is, but I was really fascinated to hear you talk with Roei about stand-up comedy and how valuable that's been for him. And sometimes I say that my actor training was some of the most important training for me being an entrepreneur. And the reason for that is probably not the surface stuff that people think, although that's kind of helpful, like being able to stand on stage, being able to public speak, being able to communicate. But I don't know if you've ever gone through actor training, but a lot of that is about you being able to sort of separate away from your ego and not be driven by your ego. And I think that this is a very interesting trait. So we have to be able to sort of shrug off the idea of, oh no, what are people going to think of me? I'm going to look like an idiot if I do this. And it sort of sets you up for taking risks in your business. It sets you up for being able to sort of be more calm, be more relaxed, be more objective about the kind of judgment you might have or the judgments you have to make as a business owner. So in terms of performance, that was something that I felt was really important for me. And there was something that, for example, doing a PhD in a science subject was not giving me at all. That kind of did the opposite in terms of like, oh, you have to sort of build up a shell and be a certain way. Whereas being an actor, you're like, no, you have to strip all this down and be like very neutral, essentially. And be self-aware. That's another one that you already mentioned, such that you can kind of build a character on top of that.
I love that. I mean, I haven't personally gone through any acting or tried my hand at stand-up comedy. I don't think that would work too well. But what I would say is I completely agree. I think it's having that confidence to put yourself out there in a very creative capacity and to essentially suck at it at first. Like you'll probably maybe get laughed at not in a good way. And, it's the confidence to put yourself out there, learn from those mistakes and be at peace with it. And that's probably where that resilience will come in, and you can build from that, and you realize that it's never as critical, like that initial failure, like that's going to help you in the long run. Just to add, when I used to look after innovation up at Future Space, which is a hub for high-tech and life science businesses who are obviously fastly growing, we engaged an external organisation to come and deliver some support. And it was all about using the concept of improv and how to implement that in the world of business. And I have to say, it was incredible. Like, my takeaways from it were, how do you inject fun into a project or a business? How do you build on other people's ideas? And just the notion that there is no stupid idea. And in fact, one of the exercises was like the power of inverting problems and flipping them on their head. So what would be the worst go-to-market strategy that you could build, as an example? And it just gets you in this creative mindset. And one of the key takeaways was, how do you think like a kid again? How do you go back to those years and just embrace everything? And I think if we took time to do that as leaders, actually some of the outcomes we would develop would be a lot better.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. Yeah, I think if we still are very scared of failure and when we fall down, really not knowing if we can get back up and feel so wounded by something that's a failure, then that's not going to help you in business. So practicing it in different ways can be really important. So speaking of failure, our relationship to failure is influenced by several factors in our life. And I think that Roei had a really interesting story in terms of what shaped his relationship to failure. So let's listen in and see what shaped his relationship to failure.
Well, all of my dad's businesses failed up until the last one, which, he sold, I want to say like 2 years ago, at the age of 70.
Wow.
Right? So, I mean, that's a great lesson in and of itself. Like persistence will get you there. I think it has a big influence because you realize what it looks like when it doesn't go well. And, as a kid, you are probably quite fickle. And it's like, one year you got presents for your birthday, one year you didn't, and it's that sort of thing. And, my mum being a primary school teacher, when my dad was having a failed period of time, it was really, really difficult. I think probably in the late 90s, so when I was like 7-8 years old, my dad lost everything, and he would have been 50 at the time. And for 2 years, he didn't have any income. 2-3 years, didn't have income. We were living off my mum's income as primary school teacher, and it's difficult. So I think you certainly have a lot of drive of being like, okay, well, I know what I want, and I know what I want to set up. But also you realize that failure won't kill you, and it's difficult. It is and it's horrible and brutal, and even the most successful founders who go through the most difficult moments, as we all do, the idea of failure is brutal and it's terrifying and it's scary, but it's not going to kill you. And it does always make me think, if it's not going to end up with me dead or in jail, like, we'll go again, you know?
I love that, because it's not fatal, is it? Like, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I think that's such a powerful question.
Yeah. And I think that is true, especially if you do appreciate that the journey is like that. You know there's going to be that thing. And that might not just be within a business. That's the lifetime trajectory. So you're almost guaranteed to have failure at some point. You know, even if not as a founder, I consider some investments that I made where I really wanted to help them and got really emotionally invested, where they didn't work out. You know, it was really difficult. So yeah, I think you realize it doesn't kill you. It's such a cliche, I know, but it is true.
So Roei, you've been a mentor with Virgin Startup Founders Institute. I used to do a lot of work with Virgin Startup as well. Great organisation. What's your driver for giving back, and why does it matter?
Yeah, and do you know what? I probably feel guilty that I don't do enough of it anymore. Not as much as I used to. I think now I try to give back more through people reach out on LinkedIn. You know, people reach out on LinkedIn a lot, and then it's have a conversation, see where we can help, and, you know, see if there's anything I can give back that way. I think as my time's got a bit busier, it's been harder to be structured with that. But ultimately, that's what life should be about, is teach and learn. Right? Every time I speak to a founder, I learn something from them. Hopefully I can teach them something. But that's the only reason we can be on this planet, is to teach and learn, to try and progress humanity. You know, that expand consciousness, further the universe, like do all of those things. Like that has to be what it's about. So I think that's the joy of life, right?
What a great and deep and meaningful answer there, Roei. Love it. What keeps Roei firing on all cylinders?
Oh, that is a good question. Love that question. I don't think I fire on all cylinders much, right? I think there's real ebbs and flows. I think it's funny. Last year I spent 3 months single. It was in between relationships. And during those 3 months, I went like super optimal ghost mode, maybe even 5 months, where it's like 5 a.m. wake up, in the gym, no drink, everything. I was perfect. And I was firing on all cylinders by all accounts. But social connection totally dropped. Wasn't seeing friends, wasn't doing anything social, wasn't doing anything fun. Business was really benefiting from it. But actually, social connection needs to be part of the firing on all cylinders piece. And I think it's really difficult to do everything. You know, how does having an active social life and a loving relationship match up with I'm going to be in bed for 9 p.m. and up 5 a.m. every single morning? Right? It's really difficult to do. And I think especially in this, you know, Andrew Hubermanized, you know, Joe Roganized world of like perfect routine and this and that, like we beat ourselves up so much to fire on all cylinders. And I think it's a really difficult thing to do. At the end of the day, we're all trying our best. I really believe that. And, you know, it will look like that. Showing up every day will look different. But for me, I think I would say that the biggest driver right now is, you know, I'm so grateful to my team and to my investors who have shown faith in me, who have backed the project, who, you know, as team members have given me, you know, some of the best years of their lives to help me build my vision and alongside them. And yes, they're all stakeholders and equity holders and everything else, but so grateful to them. Like that's what I want. That's really what drives us is just making sure that, you know, for everyone who's backed the vision early on, customers, investors, employees, team, you know, we get the right outcome.
Roei, can you tell me a bit about your journey with ADHD and also being dyslexic?
Yeah, absolutely. Something I'm really passionate about. So diagnosed with dyslexia probably like 8, 9 years old, when I was doing the usual thing of getting my B's and D's and P's and Q's the wrong way around and not really reading properly. And then the ADHD thing came much, much later. And I think it's because ADHD was not really as well of a known thing as it is now, because now it's, you know, everywhere. But when I was, I guess, 14 years old, I was about to be kicked out of school. And rightfully so. I was a huge distraction to everyone else in my class. I couldn't concentrate. I knew I was smart, but I used to get terrible results on everything because I just couldn't focus. And again, super grateful to my school who set me up with the right sort of special needs education, that's what it was at the time, to basically assess what was going on. And ended up within 6 months an ADHD diagnosis, and it was life-changing. Literally went from I was in with the wrong crowd, I was a distraction, I was getting myself into all sorts of trouble, to being a really, really good student and, managing just about to get through to uni, but then, getting a first at uni, getting into a master's before dropping out, but life-changing. And I know that it is difficult to get diagnosed, and it is difficult for people to get that, especially on the NHS. And again, I was really blessed that my school helped me through that. But I think look into it, do research. If you find the types of thinking associated with ADHD and understanding those types of thinking is beneficial to you, there might be some great upside. And even if you are neurotypical, just understanding about different ways of thinking for yourself and for other people can help with empathy. And ultimately, it's not on or off, right? It's people talk about mental health and neurodiversity as a spectrum, but I really see it as a Venn diagram with lots of overlapping. And I want to know who this neurotypical person is, right? Who's this ground zero guy or girl that we're all like, yeah, that's neurotypical. Like, we're all struggling with various things. And again, it's really interesting to understand, is ADHD, there are different schools of thoughts around it. From a neuroscientific perspective, people really relate it to neurological inflammation. And actually, there's a lot of stuff in that. On a psychological level, some people think it's trauma response. So no one really knows what these things are. And that's why I say to everyone, do reading, understand different types of thinking associated with different types of conditions, and learning about the brain can only benefit us all, right? And learning about the mind can only benefit us all.
So building multiple businesses, Roy, it can be all-consuming at times. What's a sacrifice that you've made along that journey?
I think sacrifice is a reality of going on a founding journey. I'm sure you've seen the same, Ollie, yourself. It's it can be brutal at times, and I think especially if you started that journey young, so straight out of uni or even earlier than that, you'll have to give up on certain moments that are quite defining in relationships. I think it's probably the biggest one. And when you get to 30 or 35 and you're looking around, you're like, oh, I've got 3 friends left. And rightfully so, because I didn't show up to the birthday parties or the dinners or the things, and I wasn't there for them in moments where I should have been. So it's, I don't think we can ever feel hard done by. It's decisions that we make to go down this route. We need to stand by them. But that's why, and we spoke about this before, Ollie, talking about the realities of being a founder, that sacrifice is going to be part of it. And know that the decisions you make, we can't be narcissistic about it and say, well, because I've decided to be founder, my mission is really important, and therefore my friends should understand that I don't do those things. No, you're just a shit friend, but you chose to be, and it's totally fine. And I think you go back to the why. You go back to the purpose, right? And I think, you've had Simon Squibb on here before, right? And, what he's doing now with the Purposeful Project, I think that's it. I think that's where we find the solace in the sacrifice, is going back to, well, why are we doing this? And I think if you can find your peace with that, then you become okay with the sacrifice. But yes, I think friendships and relationships is the biggest one, and the one you feel the most as you start getting a bit older, right?
And talking of those moments of questioning everything and going back to your why, what gets you out of bed in the morning, and what is your why?
My why? Well, as I said, like right now, repaying the faith that my team and, the people around us have given us, and the early customers and the early partners and all that side, like that is probably my biggest driver. But ultimately, I know the stress, anxiety, depression, pressure involved in the startup ecosystem, and the more that we can do to give people the tools to improve their chances of success, the better that we're doing. And there are people doing things which are 1,000 times more important than us, which if we can plug into their journey and give them frameworks to improve their chance of success, like one of our success stories with Connected is, sorry, I forgot the name of it, a business called Limitless Travel. Mm-hmm. So Angus is the founder there. They're doing awesome things, and Limitless Travel is helping differently abled people travel the world. And some of his customer testimonials, there was a woman who's talking about Limitless. She's able to go paragliding in Tenerife with more dignity than going shopping at her local Morrison's, right? And it's that sort of thing. And they use Connected. They found investors. They raised like 800K through Connected. They got some great advisors, and we are just help plugging into a little part of their journey, and they're doing, as I said, so much more important work than us. But if we can just help more and more people get through that route and empower more people who are trying to solve some of the biggest problems in the world, then that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you're enabling and empowering them to be able to achieve their own whys.
100%, exactly that. Well put. Might have to steal that from you, Ollie.
Feel free.
So Roei was very clear there about his purpose to help others achieve their purpose, for example, with Limitless. And this is something that we're doing a very similar job here too, I would say. We're helping other entrepreneurs to be able to build the businesses that they want to build, just in a very different way. And I think that being led by purpose is one way to stay resilient as a founder, being motivated by that guiding light, by that impact that you want to see in the world. So let's talk a little bit more about resilience and persistence and what we learned from listening to Roei there. I think that one of the interesting things we've already touched on in this episode today is this idea that serial entrepreneurs, serial founders are able to actually develop, build skills, and probably ultimately have more fun and be more effective in terms of building their businesses. So I think there's something to do with looking through the lens of a lifetime rather than looking at through a lens of that single business and what you want to achieve in that single business. And that can be incredibly helpful for building that resilience.
100%. And I think founders need to think more like investors in this term of thinking in decades rather than years. So if they're playing the long game, then in the moment, the day-to-day doesn't matter so much. If you're focused on this long-term vision and it's obviously bigger than just yourself, like we're talking about this big vision, how are you going to make this dent in the world? What are you going to do to get there? And I think if that's driving you and you're taking that long-term view, then you're going to get success because you can be patient, you're going to be motivated, and you're going to be driven every single day to make that happen.
Yeah, I think I see a lot of founders, especially early stage founders, really struggle with this. And this continued pull between, but I need to get these day-to-day things done in order to get to that bigger vision. But I think often the balance is very wrong. And you said about like thinking in years. I mean, I think that a lot of the founders I work with are thinking in weeks. And so it's one of the jobs I try to do is really get them to step back and at least think over that period of maybe like 3 to 4 years. What are the different phases of the business that you're going to be going through? And like you said, if ultimately we can step back and think even more long term, I think that's what helps you to do things such as be confident about getting the funding you need rather than just scraping through, or being confident to delegate and perhaps even invest in, if you can, in bringing like the A-type people into your team versus sort of just scraping around and trying to get a bit of help where you can, or burning your own candle at both ends to make things happen, but maybe not very effectively. So I think this kind of stepping back and thinking more long term really helps you to not get stuck in that, but I have to just do X, Y, and Z because those things need to be done. Absolutely, but do it as part of a wider framework. Like, don't get lost from those bigger things that you want to achieve. Otherwise, days, weeks, months, years pass, and you have been going around in circles and you haven't actually stepped forward or done, as I call it, kind of worked on the big bricks or the big blocks. You've been working on all those tiny little pieces of sand and so you're very slowly filling up the jug versus if you put the big blocks in and work on those big blocks, then you'll move a lot more quickly and more effectively.
And it is really, really hard. Like, you can be running around in circles, chasing your tail as a founder. Like, if you're, trying to raise your seed round and you finally get there, but then it's like the next challenge, you need to scale up, you need to build a team, you need to, get your product to market. Like, all of these things, like challenges will come in waves, and it's about how do you adapt to them and actually, as you say, take some time to step back from it. And I think if you're not talking to external people, then it's near on impossible to do that. You need to be speaking to, even if it's a friend, a coach, a mentor, a fellow peer, a fellow founder, whoever it is, you need to be doing that to be able to play the longer term game. Otherwise, as you say, time is just going to pass and you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve. Otherwise, you will get caught in the day-to-day. And don't get me wrong, it is bloody scary. Like if you've got a month of runway left, or you're worried about cash flow issues, or somebody's gone off on long-term sick, like what are you going to do? Like how is that going to impact your business? So it is hard, but I think that's why support is so important.
And that support really helps you to navigate the ebbs and the flows as well. So one thing that I always like to think about is, okay, we're all great in those highs and when everything's going really well and it can feel really motivating and everything else. But what are you doing when those times are tougher? And I think that's the shape of kind of an entrepreneur or a founder that's going to be a successful founder as well, is how are you dealing with it in those more difficult times? And or even in those busier times, like recognizing, okay, yeah, there are going to be times when you have to get your head down, get focused, get through something in order to get to the next stage. But how are you continuing to kind of helicopter in your thinking? How are you still stepping back? How are you still gaining perspective at those times? How are you still keeping yourself healthy at those times? And how are you making sure those times don't go on indefinitely?
I think we said there, Becky, about actually being healthy is so critical and really important, and often an issue that's neglected by founders. Like you've got to manage your energy. Like if you're going through tough times within the business, like you're probably going to be operating on the back foot, and that's never a good thing because you're not going to be in that creative mode to be able to solve problems. So it's about managing your energy, maybe taking a bit of time off, doing some reflecting, and then going again.
And this is how Roei was really inspiring me as well, was he said, if I don't end up dead or in jail, then I'll do it. And I think there's something about thinking bigger, about taking bolder decisions, about, taking bigger risks, that allows you also to navigate these things without being in fight or flight. It's sort of, okay, you're still being courageous, you're still stepping up, you're still being bold, but you're not responding out of fear. You're responding out of like creating something exciting, something big, something impactful. And they're very different lenses to look at a business through.
And my takeaway here for founders is just trying to encourage people to think bigger. Like if you've got that bigger vision, it's going to be a lot easier to communicate. It's going to attract the right people within the business. Like in terms of even selling, like if you're selling something for £200 or £2,000 or £20,000, it's as hard to sell that same product or service regardless of the size of it. So just think bigger.
So talking about the way people think, you touched on neurodiversity in this section, and I've spoken before. I got an autism diagnosis just over a year ago. So this is a topic that's very close to my heart. And one of the questions I've been asking myself a lot recently is, are neurodivergent people more likely to be entrepreneurs? Because I've got to tell you, in my entrepreneur network, there are a lot of people who are, a whole spectrum of different types of neurodiversity. So certainly lots of ADHDers, some autistic people, bipolar, dyslexia, so there's several different types of neurodiversity that seem to be represented a lot in the entrepreneurial community. Has that been your experience as well?
100%. I mean, if we look back at all of the founders on this podcast, like there is a lot of people who are neurodivergent. I mean, I don't know the definition of a neurotypical person or who they are, but what I do know is that entrepreneurship often attracts people who are more neurodivergent. I think it comes down to that, maybe that different way of thinking, that different attitude to risk. Like they're not following that common path. Like they don't want to be a sheep. So it's about carving out their own lane. And I think that's probably why it attracts more people like that.
Something I've been wondering is about whether it also helps you to develop the traits you need as an entrepreneur. So does being neurodivergent make you more resilient, make you self-aware because you've had to be? So, and you've kind of learnt those things maybe earlier on in your life because and certainly for, people like me and several of the people I know who are late diagnosed autistic, you've been developing these skills without really realizing why you had to develop these skills. And so certainly resilience is something that I feel like was developed because of the fact that I was like, why is like things should be working and they're not working, and I, very uncomfortable with failure, and trying not to fail, but actually inevitably failing, and that being very difficult meant that it was actually something I had to learn how to manage very early on.
What was that first step that you took on that journey, Becky? Just for maybe people listening who think maybe I am neurodivergent in some way, but I just don't know. Like, what did you do?
Yeah. So I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug right now because what I did was, it was more that I was burning out all the time. So initially, I wasn't thinking about like, am I neurodiverse, neurodivergent? And so I was actually like YouTubing, Googling, like, why am I burning out all the time? Like, why am I struggling with like some of the social aspects of work? What's going on? And then I was landing on these YouTube videos that were made by autistic people, and specifically autistic people who were diagnosed as adults, who would be seen as so-called high functioning, which is a term that we don't really like to use because there's still lots of challenges. But kind of who can mask, who can mirror very easily, who kind of show up in the world, perhaps who have been able to use their strengths in a way that means that you can survive in the world and you're not being seen. What's it? Somebody said to me the other day, like, because I'm not flapping all the time, then people, people don't necessarily assume that you're, so you can kind of pass as neurotypical, again, whatever that means. So starting to see these videos and being like, like this was something I never thought about because I didn't fit myself into that kind of category, or that stereotype of what an autistic person is. And then the more and more I watched these videos, the more I was like, oh my gosh, this is like holding up a mirror. I feel very seen right now. So the reason I said I'm doing a shameless plug is I do actually have a YouTube channel called Spoonie Squared, where I talk a lot about my diagnosis process, how I came to start thinking about this, but also I'm really focused on that channel on autism in the workplace, autism specifically because that's my experience, but I think it applies to neurodiversity more widely as well. So yeah, if you do want to kind of get more in depth in terms of my thoughts around that as well, go and check out Spoonie Squared on YouTube. But yeah, so I think I learned a lot from all of the other people around me. And of course, the more I started to talk about it, the more it became something that I was aware of, the more I was able to, I was then connecting with other people who are neurodivergent. And one of the things I learned, and this is from somebody who called Matthew Punter, who's doing a PhD in autism at work. And he said to me that right now, neurodivergent people are less likely to be in work than women were during the suffrage movement and Black people were during the civil rights movement.
Jesus.
So, and the stats are incredible. Like it's something like 1 in 5 autistic people are in work. So there's actually a turning point right now. We're at a point in history around neurodivergence. And for all the kind of cynical people out there who are like, how come everyone's getting an ADHD diagnosis right now? It's like, well, actually what we're doing is becoming more aware of how this is really impacting a massive swathe of our population. And actually these are people who have incredible strengths and, like you said, it kind of can build incredible businesses. But I also think this employment statistic is one which also tells us why there's so many entrepreneurs who are neurodivergent because, and somebody said it to me once, they were like, you don't work in a corporate because you couldn't work in a corporate. And it's like, there's two sides to that coin. One is like, will they have me? Can I fit into that box? And the other is like, yeah, is it something that's actually going to work for me? And it doesn't most of the time. Like the workplace is really not a very nice place for people who think differently a lot of the time. So I think that's the other reason that people who are neurodivergent are often entrepreneurs, because they they're like, well, I can't fit in these other spaces, so I'm going to do this for myself.
And that comes back quite nicely to talking about making sure people are fulfilled, they've got purpose, they're in the right job or whatever that is, to be able to live life on their own terms and operate to their full potential.
100%. And I think that's the big message here. It's not about labels, and it's not about which hat are you wearing, or which badge are you wearing, which diagnosis have you got. I think the key thing, and especially because it's very expensive and very difficult and very timely to get a diagnosis, if there is anyone listening who like thinks that this is something that is going on, what I'd say to you, or even if you don't think this is what's going on, focus on self-awareness, focus on your own strengths, focus on like really finding that alignment, and that applies to anybody. So that's sort of what I've learned along the way as well. Getting my diagnosis, that's what it did for me. It just allowed me to be like, I can just be myself now.
Do you feel like a different person?
I feel like I'm the person I always was, but it feels very different to just lean into that and be comfortable with that. And life has been kind of joyous since being in that place where you're like, oh, I'm just me, and that's kind of where we're all trying to get to, right?
Some great takeaways there. So lean in to yourself and focus on self-awareness. Yeah,
self-awareness and your strengths, and really look after yourself through everything that you're going through. So let's move on and hear more about Roei's story, and I'm very excited to hear what he's got planned next.
It's a great question, and just to clarify, I never want to give wrong information. It was 4x year on year the first 3 years, then we grew 2.5x last year. I always say this because to our point earlier, I think it's so important to be honest and realistic, so that founders listening know if the advice and the things that we're talking about is relevant to them or not. We were talking about this before, like what someone's telling me with their 200 million Series C raise with their 3,000 employees, what I should be doing, like it's not relevant. So I always try to be really transparent about my numbers so that founders can put it into context. So we've had some really good growth. We launched into Miami just over 3 months ago, really early there. We're probably around like 70, 80 customers in the US so far. So it's really early, generating like 100K ARR from the US. So super, super early on that side. In 5 years' time, I genuinely believe that Connected will be the default operating system and network for the early stage. I see already that we have, wait lists of users and makeshift users in like 16, 17 countries. We only built the system for the UK and only back in the last year optimized it for the US. So I would love to get this into as many hands as possible. The team is highly ambitious. I think like the average age of our exec team is like 31, 32. So that everyone's at that stage in their career where it's like we really want to go hammer and tong, and this is a really big thing for us. We're massively ambitious. I want to see the application in as many countries as possible. And if we can, again, get into emerging markets where, again, we can just help get that best practice out there, plug in, not do anything which is damaging to these startups, not taking equity, nothing like that, just giving them the frameworks and the operating system for success, then that will be a massive success for us.
I love that long-term vision and, being that one-stop shop for early-stage founders raising investment. How do you account for cultural differences and the ways of doing business and different ecosystems when you're rolling out on an international basis?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the benefits of the space that we're in, which is the making and managing of connections around capital and expertise, these things should be fairly cross-border. If I look at Connected ourselves, we have investors from San Francisco to Sydney and everywhere in between. And most people's cap tables are the same, right? These are inherently global segments that we're looking at. And, a performance marketing expert in Dubai is just as brilliant and useful to a startup in London as it is to Dubai, or a startup in London as it is to a startup in San Francisco. So there should be real global connectivity here, and we shouldn't face a cold start problem. But then obviously, and it's one of the reasons we stayed away from doing any transaction stuff or arrangement stuff, because then you really are going into very different regulatory environments. And okay, well, you need to see this is how a safe works versus an ASA versus an advanced versus normal subscription agreement. So by just really focusing on interaction and network and connectivity, we hope we can get a bit more of a global feel in a bit of a quick way. But obviously, every time we look at go-to-market, of course, we're working with people on the ground. We try to get advisors there. We learn tons from our customers, right? So when we went to the US, we gave 50 memberships for free to every user type, just to give it to them, work with them, learn, understand. And I think that's a really nice way of being able to do it, and certainly would love to continue doing it that way.
I love that. So it is that think globally, act locally.
Yes, exactly. A nice one. Another one I'm going to steal from you, Ollie.
Feel free. So what changes do you foresee in early stage investment?
I think one of the biggest changes I've seen is, and this is a great one, is the lower average ticket size. I think when I started raising my first angel investment round in like 2013, 2014, it was like the idea of anyone investing less than like even 50K. Because I remember sitting down with lawyers when they were like, well, they still weren't really sure about, raising investment, especially if, you weren't able to go to big law firms, right? I'm talking about going to small law firms as a first-time founder. And I was educating them about like, equity does dilute. And they're like, no, it doesn't. So with venture tooling where it is right now, and companies like Valban and Lever Partners doing amazing stuff for syndication and SPVs and deal flow search and stuff like Connected's doing, I think just the general accessibility is so much higher. And again, crowdfunding platforms doing brilliant work on this as well. The barriers to entry for getting into the early stage investment space are so much lower, and it's amazing. A company that I follow, I won't mention who they are. They're fundraising at the moment, and I see that they have like. They've been building out a B2C play, and they're not using a crowdfunding platform. They're doing an SPV themselves, and they've got like 171 investors, where the size of that SPV is like 185K. Like it's small ticket stuff, but for them it's great. They're not having to go to a crowdfunding platform and take a cut. They're happy to do the management themselves. Although I think that is pretty brutal, but it's the way they've gone. And I think it's just the barriers to entry have never been this low, and I think that's an amazing spot to be in.
Yeah, ultimately, if you're democratizing investing, then it's going to benefit everyone in the long term.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think especially when we live in a world where I, as a adult, can go and put my entire monthly pay in a fixed odds betting machine and lose it in 20 minutes, but I'm not allowed to invest in a startup unless I can prove that I'm a sophisticated or self-certified high net worth, is a backward system to me, but different conversation, right?
Definitely broken. Bit of a generic question here, Roy, but if you had to try and distill down all of your business learnings and give just one piece of advice to an early stage founder, what would that be?
It's really easy to listen to advice and experience on things you have no idea about. Where you need to really put the mirror on yourself and really listen is on the things you think you know. If you're amazing at sales process, you can trick yourself into being like, there's nothing left to learn on that side. But you know nothing about quantum mechanics, and someone comes in and starts telling you about that, you're like, I'm a sponge. Teach me everything about quantum mechanics. I know fuck all. Oh, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah.
Okay. I know nothing, right? But actually, if someone comes in and tells you about how to improve your sales process, I think especially as a first-time founder, like you're like, this is my domain. Maybe your back gets up a little bit, and maybe you don't listen in the same way that you should. And I think that's where we miss out a lot. As founders, we know how to identify our weaknesses, and I mean that's like so 101 as a founder. So I'm not going to be like identify your weaknesses. We know we need to do that. Bring in tech, bring in engineering, bring in product, whatever it might be. But the one that I see a lot of people get caught out is the one which they consider to be their domain. Never stop learning. So challenge yourself on the things you think you know, not just the things that you know you don't.
I love that. So it's going from that good to great and being open to actually learning and growing personally.
Absolutely. I think there's like the fake humility, which is, well, I know nothing about engineering, so I brought in a head of engineering because I'm not going to do everything myself. And there's a real humility of like, I still have no idea what the fuck I'm doing across many, many things. Like I need all the help I can get.
Where can people find out a bit more about Connected and you personally online?
Yeah, so follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. I tend not to use TikTok that much, but I am there. And yeah, Connected, go to www.connected.com.
Excellent.
Connected is no last E as well, which is, and I can't imagine, well, yeah, when I created the name, I couldn't imagine how many times I'd have to say without the last E, right? It felt like a good idea at the time.
I'm sure you'll find some. We'll put it in the show notes as well for you, Roei. Roei, I know you had a question for our listeners. So what was that question?
The question that I would like to ask our listeners or your listeners today is, if there was one thing that you could bring into your life right now as a founder, which would it be? Which one of these is a priority? Is it funding? Is it talent? Or is it revenue? I'd be really interested to see what most founders say about that. Funding, talent, or revenue. Which one would you choose if you could get it into your business immediately?
Wow, I think we're going to get some split results on that because it's such a great question. Roei, if I knew you better, what's one question that I would have asked you, and what is the answer to that question?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I guess a good question to ask me. That is a really, really difficult one. It would probably be about managing ADHD as a founder and the sort of, because I think ADHD in and of itself is one thing, but managing ADHD as a founder is a really, really different thing. And the main reason for that is ADHD brain functions, the healthy brain functions by the focus and task modules of the brain firing asynchronously. In the ADHD brain, they fire synchronously. And the way that we regulate those two modules is through dopamine release, right? So high dopamine situation, my brain acts focused and normal. And I think that's why you have such a high prevalence of ADHD within the entrepreneurial environment rather than general population, because we can only concentrate in high risk reward. And I think when you're in early stage startup, it's easy because basically everything's life or death. So high dopamine, high risk, high reward, like you're locked in. I think when you get to a stage as a founder, and it's only lasts like weeks at time, because the next existential crisis or opportunity is only around the corner. But managing ADHD in those pockets of stability as a business when things are going really well is a really, really interesting one, and one that I'm certainly still figuring out.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And lastly, can you give us a bit of a spiel on Big Risk Energy for anybody who's not listened to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Big Risk Energy was a podcast and might be again. We spoke to an amazing range of guests about risks they've taken in their lives, risks they've taken in their careers, how they turned out when they went well and when they didn't. Just to go into my favorite topic, which relates to the ADHD bit, which is taking big risks and big bets. But yeah, it's all on YouTube, all on TikTok, everywhere. And reach out if you like it.
Roei, thank you so much for your time and insights. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Ollie, you're a legend. Thank you so much, mate.
Taking big risks and big bets. I love that. I think that's something that we definitely all can take away from. This kind of been the big theme of this episode, hasn't it? Like really focusing on those big risks, those big wins, thinking bigger. And one of the ways we do that is thinking about our priorities. And so I thought that was really interesting that that's what Roy's question was all about. Which one of these is a priority for you? So we're going to obviously post that question, as always, on our socials. So which of these is a priority? Funding, talent, or revenue? And make sure that you go over and let us know which one is the biggest priority for you. I'd be very interested to hear where you're all at with that. Making sure that you're prioritizing something, of course, and thinking big about it. One of the things that Roei talked about was the fact that barriers to entry have never been so low. And I think that this is incredibly interesting because, of course, it's very true. We know this, being able to create content, being able to reach audiences, being able to have so many tools now. At the end of the day, entrepreneurship, startups, it's a whole industry in itself. And so there is so many things out there that really do make entrepreneurship accessible. But I think that there is a con to that, which is that it means that it's now a very big market in itself. It means that doing entrepreneurship is much more crowded than it used to be. And so do you think that it throws up additional challenges for people? And how do entrepreneurs differentiate themselves when everyone has a lot of access to entrepreneurship?
It's a bloody great question. I think firstly what I would say, if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a want to be entrepreneur, wannabe, then I would say just get in the ring. Like, stop playing from the sidelines. The only way you're going to learn is by doing it. Like, you can read all the books, do all the courses. I've done all of that. Like, it doesn't get you anywhere. You just got to start. I think that's the most important thing. And I'm going to put my head on the line here and say this is most definitely the best time in the world to be an entrepreneur right now. All you need, as we know, is a laptop, an internet connection. You know, the rise of like SaaS products as an example, you know, no code. I mean, historically, if you wanted some leading edge software, you had to be like a large corporation and pay like an annual fee for the software up front. Like, these barriers are completely gone now. You can stop and start a subscription as you please. And obviously now with the rise of generative AI, this has even reduced the barriers further. So I think crazy things are happening right now. Like, developers could be out of jobs at some point in the near future with the rise of AI, which is crazy to think. But there are downsides to all of this, as you say. So I think that one of the downsides, first of all, is like there's become a wash of AI content on the internet. So you'll see like AI written content on maybe a platform like LinkedIn as an example, and there'd be like AI written comments and then replying to those comments on AI, and it's like there's no human interaction here. It's like an absolute load of BS. So it's like there are definitely some downsides. Also, as you alluded to, obviously the more people that enter the market, the higher the competition. But I don't think necessarily that's a bad thing, because the more competition there is in the world, in any market at any given time, it means that you can learn from others. You have to operate at your best, but most importantly, you have to find out what makes you different. Why should people care about you? What value are you adding to the world? So I think that it's a great time, and I would encourage people just to start.
I absolutely agree that it puts more on you in terms of really finding those differentiating factors. So just because it's more accessible doesn't mean it's easier to make that business actually happen, to take off, to hit those goals in your business. And I think that that's just important to bear in mind. There's a lot of other food for thought there as well around AI. If all our businesses end up just being AI, then maybe we can all sit back and relax a little bit more as well. So it's, again, not necessarily always a bad thing, but I also think that one of the differentiating factors for businesses is going to be the human and how we continue to really respond to humans and human need, especially in this rise of technology.
And there's going to be a massive change, right? This is the fourth industrial revolution. There's going to be a massive change in the labour market, and it's about how you utilise your existing skill sets as a human, like you're saying, to be able to do more, add more value, and be known for something. I think that's the critical thing here.
And so Roei and Connected have definitely been developed to help people to do that. So if you're interested, do check out the links. Go and check out the Connected platform. I think it's really interesting, and it's been growing very fast. So go and have a look, see how they can help you. And don't forget to go and answer Roei's question on our socials. Ollie, what are people saying about the last episode from Superbooks?
We had a great question from the founders of Superbooks. They wanted to know, how long does your child or child in your family spend reading per day at home, either independently or reading together? The four options were A, 0 time at all, B, I don't know, C, under 20 minutes, or D, over 20 minutes.
The results in, and I'm delighted to say that 69% of you have said that they spend over 20 minutes reading at home per day, followed by 15% under 20 minutes, then followed by the remaining 8% spending zero time at all, and then again another 8% I don't know. So delighted to hear that the majority of your children are spending over 20 minutes a day reading and working on their education.
Thank you everyone for listening. If you like what you've heard, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And don't forget, there's a big selection of previous episodes. Just search Founded and Grounded on your favourite podcast player.